The clients are not coming to you for the good of their health. They're not coming to you for a bit of fun. They're not coming to you because everything is going well with their lives. They're coming to you because something has gone wrong with their life and they want you to try and fix it. And I don't think that computers can do that. Computers and the law itself, they're just tools. The law is a rule book.
Hello everyone, we are once again back on Super Lawyer YouTube channel. Here today we have with us Mr. David Boyle, who has been a barrister, who has been a writer, mediator and visiting professor. He is based in Manchester, England. He actually has nurtured or guided more than 1,250 mini pupils, 19 mentees, 5 surrogate pupils and 3 pupils, and he is a most humble person I have met who has achieved this much. So thank you, Professor, for being here once again. We would like to start this interview with a very, very obvious question and asking you about your experience, which includes you being a writer, mediator, and barrister. We would like you to share how these roles have complemented each other and in your legal practice and how they contribute to your overall professional development. How did you become that particular lawyer, barrister in the first place?
Well, first of all, Divya, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be invited. It's always nice to be asked. And I'm dreadfully lucky. I mean, I'm dreadfully lucky in the sense that I found this sort of Boyle-shaped, Boyle-sized hole. And I was this Boyle-sized, Boyle-shaped peg. And the two of them seemed to work really quite nicely together. So I've always taken the view that barrister is a sort of multifactorial concept, particularly in civil litigation. I do civil litigation, I do mainly personal injury work, but I'm expected to be a drafter of documents. I'm supposed to be a confidant, a friend, an associate. I'm supposed to be a confessor. I'm supposed to be a psychiatrist, a physio. I'm supposed to be a rehabilitation person. I'm an accountant, an engineer, some sort of ringmaster, maybe a sort of circus ringmaster, asking other people to do things and help me out. And a storyteller. And in the old-fashioned sense of the word, a sort of champion. One of those people that the king sends into battle on his behalf so that the champion gets beaten up by the other side rather than the king himself. And I think that when you do that and you have all these different facets to the work that you're doing, it's first of all quite stressful. And sometimes your brain gets full. Sometimes you just want to blow off steam, you want to do something different. But equally, you're always trying to communicate. You're always trying to engage with people. The work is there to, you're about engaging with a client, with your solicitor, with the opponent, with the judge. So you're always having these conversations with people. And in fact, writing and the mediation type work is almost an adjunct to what I am, who I am, which in the first instance is barrister. I am a barrister. And I think writing happens because you do all this thinking about work. And sometimes you've done all the thinking and only 10% of it becomes relevant to the case because you end up thinking all the way around it and you look at it from the other side and you're trying to come to you're looking at the big field of play, and then suddenly there's this tiny little thread that runs through it, and that's the one that you end up on. So writing was this sort of excuse really to clear all the other things there away and to package them up quite nicely and say, well, I've done all this thinking. It would be a huge shame if that went to waste. And of course, you're conscious that because the more you write, the better you get at writing. And for a lot of people, they go on Twitter or X or whatever it is this week, and they blurt something out. And when the character limit was very tight, you had to be quite careful about how you crafted a tweet. And then they expanded the character limit, and then people just started ranting. I didn't enjoy it anymore. And then you moved on to LinkedIn, and again, there's this character limit, and you're trying to refine your argument into this really tiny, distilled version of something. It's a soundbite. So writing is this opportunity to say, well, hold on a second. I can give you a soundbite. That's fascinating. But you might want to think about, and suddenly you can expand on those ideas because the pages are there. You fill the page. Editing it down afterwards is more tricksy. You have to stop and think about it and say, do I really want to say that? Do I really need to say that? But for the most part, I think my books are always quite discursive. They are, once you've heard me speak, you read the books in my voice, and I've tried to keep to that sort of true nature of myself because you're trying to guide people. You're trying to explain these ideas, and you want it to be the equivalent of sitting down with a cup of tea and having a one-to-one conversation. You want the reader to be engaged as if we were sitting either here opposite each other on a screen or next to each other in front of an open fire somewhere, or whatever we're trying to do. Because for me, that is the easiest way of communicating, and it's the best way to receive that information. And a lot of the time, for students particularly, there is this huge disparity between the person giving the lecture and the student receiving the information. And if you feel that you're being talked down to, some people respond well to that, but a lot of people, they want to engage a bit more, and it's easier to engage if somebody is talking to you as if you're an equal. So the writing is something that's flowed naturally from all the thinking, and the mediation, which is a modest part of my practice. When I do it, I enjoy it. People seem to enjoy the experience of being mediated. I hope they do, but it's not something that's really as busy as it would like to be, mainly because I'm doing so much other stuff elsewhere. But again, it's about pragmatic problem solving. And if you're, as an advocate, thinking about both sides of the case anyway, which I personally believe you should be, mediating is just this natural point of say, well, clearly you think this, clearly you think that, and where do we get to between the two of you? So they're not, writing and mediation don't drag me forward as a barrister. They're just a sort of expansion where my brain just goes, but actually it's quite a nice way of being as well-rounded as you can be professionally. It's filling those little air pockets that might otherwise exist.
So you are a mentor, you are a guide, you are a mediator, you are a writer. What have you left for others to do is something which comes to mind. I would now move ahead and would like to ask, how did you enter into mentoring, and the approach which you have chosen? Like you said, many people like being treated as equals rather than being talked down to. So, what do you believe it adds to the enhancement of your legal profession and the way it has impacted your practice, and you being the mentor to those people who are in need of that at that particular moment of time? Because you have been a great mentor. That's why there are so many pupils under you. They have learned so much. So, what made you become that amazing mentor?
It's quite embarrassing to say that I recently listed all my mentees, and I'd always worked on the basis that I'd had 18 or 19, and the last person I sort of gave an official number to, I said, oh, you could be number 19. And I found a list from about 18 years ago, which had some names on it that I'd completely forgotten about. So I'm going to have to amend my CV because I think technically I'm now up to 33. And I had a conversation with somebody the other day which said, if you want to be number 34, you can be number 34. So I've sort of recalibrated a little bit. And it sounds awful, but I actually had to email or text somebody and say, look, it sounds like a silly question, but do you think of yourself as my mentee? Because I don't. And he said, yeah, of course I am. I mean, your friend as well, but no, you've always been a mentor. And I went, oh, right, okay, well, that's another one I need to add to the list. So I think there are two issues. First of all, I think I take after my dad. I'm turning into my father all the time. We all turn into our parents potentially at some point in our lives. But my father was always somebody who was very supportive of me and my little brother and my mum. Yeah, he was somebody who was always available to have that conversation with. So when you talk to somebody who doesn't have somebody to have that conversation with, you think to yourself, well, it was a norm for me. In reality, it was a privilege. Objectively, it was a privilege. But when you're there and it's a subjective norm, you don't realise that it's a privilege. And that's probably how privilege works across the world. You have a privilege, and for you, it is normal. And I think that as soon as you're a law student and you're looking for opportunities, you will have good experiences and you'll have bad experiences. And I was really lucky. I got offers of mini pupillage. I did 5 mini pupillages back in 1992, 93, and they were a mixed bag. 3 of them were interesting, exciting, and useful. 1 was awful, and 1 was utterly forgettable. and I have a very good memory. And if somebody said to me, "And what did you do in that one?" It's like, I remember being there, but I don't remember learning or anything like that. So, having had bad experiences, or one particular disappointing experience, I just thought nobody else should have that. Nobody else should come away from an experience, because I came away from that experience thinking, I do not want to apply to that set of chambers. And that was probably wrong of me. It was probably me being overconfident about my opportunities elsewhere. But I did not apply to a set of chambers which in any normal circumstance I would have done, but for that experience. So you sit there and you think, we should be able to do better. We should be able to teach. And from my second 6 months, when I was only just on my feet, I had an awful conference when I was very, very junior, probably only 2 or 3 weeks in, where the clerks said, "Oh, we've got a couple of mini pupils. You don't mind if they sit in?" And of course, you're so junior, you don't really have the confidence to say no, just no. And the answer should have been no, just no. But of course, once that happens, it's the thin end of the wedge. The door opens, and I'm a huge fan of chambers. I like to be in chambers. You find me in chambers today, and I come in because it's part of the community. It's part of that collegiate thing that is what the bar, for me, is all about. And then when I bought a flat in the centre of Manchester. So it was maybe 200, 300, 400 metres from the old building. When we moved to the new building in 99, it was literally further from the front door of Chambers to my office than it was from my front door to the front door of Chambers. So I was always in. And even if I wasn't coming in and I was going out to court, the clerks could say, well, we know that we can walk somebody round to your flat, or you can come and collect them in 2 minutes. So suddenly, every mini pupil, you're the default. You're the default option. And I enjoy it because meeting new people is always interesting. And when you're talking to people, the first set of mini pupils were probably 3 or 4 years behind me. So at that stage, you're an older brother. And then you get to be a sort of maybe a slightly dubious uncle who's just maybe 10, 15 years difference. And then suddenly you realise that when you were that age, they weren't born. And every so often now I get a pupil who tells me that I'm older than their father. And in fact, I had a request recently for a mini pupillage from somebody saying, my father did mini pupillage with you. And I think at that point, I really did want to just find a wall and bang my head against it, because I knew at that point I was old, you know. In fairness, he was a mature student. But the point is the same, that you fall into it and it keeps you young. You know, it does keep you down with that level of student who is finding the way. And there is something magical about talking to somebody. It's about accelerating. You know, we talk about speed and we talk about acceleration, but driving at speed is not as exciting as accelerating quickly. Driving at a steady 50 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour feels like you've stopped because everybody else is just cruising along. Putting your foot down in first gear and hearing the engine rev, and that's a takeoff. Oomph. That's where the fun in life is. That's what people enjoy in life. That's the bit where you know that you are alive, when you are braking and accelerating, and it's not just the pure speed aspect, it's everything else. So when you're talking to somebody at the start of their career, each piece of information you impart represents a massive gain from their perspective. So you get pleasure from that because you want to help people, you want to educate people, you want that little light bulb moment. And trying to fine tune some nuance later on, that's lovely as well. If I can teach somebody who's experienced a new way of thinking or reinforce their ideas, that they've got the right idea, that's wonderful. But for the satisfaction of somebody coming back and saying, whoa, I never expected anybody to say that. And I'm a keen chess player, I always was a keen chess player when I was a kid. There's a fabulous book called Chess for Tigers by Simon Webb, who died years ago. What's interesting about Chess for Tigers is that most of the influential chess books over the last 150 years have been written by genuine contenders. Those are the real top Premier Division. And Webb was good, but he wasn't that good. And what he says in the book in the introduction is, he says, I can't make you the best chess player in the world, but I can try to make you the best chess player that you can be. And actually, that for me is a perfectly workable compromise. I can't make you the next stellar advocate. I can't make you the next judge, but I can just be a catalyst, perhaps, for somebody going on to things that they would never have been able to do otherwise. And all that is sometimes is just saying, look, just take a step to the left, take a step to the right, look at it from a different angle. And you look back on the mentees and looking at the full list, I look at what they've gone on to do, and some of them I've lost touch with, and some of them, they're still in touch with me after 20 years. You know, I've been to weddings, I've been to, all that sort of stuff. And these are people I met purely by chance. These are not people who have been foisted on me. I've had a couple of mentees who people have said, will you be a mentor for somebody? And I will find you the right mentee. And they've actually worked really well as well. No issue with those. But actually, sometimes you meet somebody and you realize that they've got something about them. You're not quite sure how good they are because they're very raw, they're very young, but you think to yourself, it won't take very much to shuffle their perception, their self-perception, so that they can then take those steps forward. And some of my mentees, I look at what they've achieved and it's fabulous. And there is that sort of parental pride, and maybe now I am grandfather age, maybe I am now old enough to be that old, but all those numbers, all those many pupils, I hope that they went away thinking, that was a really good day. That was something that made me different, made me a better thinker. And I look around, when we go to dinners here, we have dinners on the Northern Circuit in Manchester, and we have these big dinners. I can look around the room and think, yeah, they're a mini pupil. They were a mini pupil. They did it. They did it. Yeah, I remember them. Gosh, I remember them. Oh, did they get that? Oh, I never thought that would happen. And that, I think, is a source of huge pride. And I think, we talk about altruism. I don't think of it as altruistic because for me, I get a pleasure and a satisfaction from it. And I think altruism in its purest form is nothing about me. It's not about me getting pleasure or pride from that. So it's not altruism per se, but maybe looking at it from the outside, people think it's an altruistic thing. It becomes very time consuming. And, that I suppose brings us back to the books. And if you write a book, you can say to people, if you read the book, it saves me a day of sitting there walking you through all these ideas. And if we do meet, we can move on to the next section. We can move on to the advanced level. We can do the really scary things.
As graceful and as humble as possible a person can find, and that to a barrister. I must say that your pupils have been very lucky. For a mentee, the person who's entering the profession or even starting their life, if a person is so humble to nurture them, making sure that he or she, whosoever joins him, can become the best of what they can become, and not to make them the best chess players or best barristers or best judges. You made them what they best could be. So that's kind of a blessing for anyone. And I should also appreciate that I know you personally. I know you as a person. I can communicate with you and I can ask you questions. And it has never happened with me also that I have reached out to you and you have not responded. So that's the level of your humbleness and you being absolutely close to mentoring people. If you'll ask me, I also consider you my mentor because your first
35.
if I can reach out to you and you answer me in the time when I need guidance, definitely you are my mentor. So
Oh,
that
well,
is what I believe in.
you're very
So
welcome.
thank you so much. So moving on with this, you actually have made your reputation around the accident reconstruction and fraudulent claims. How did this particular interest came and how did you start navigating these complex areas? And the kind of strategy that you may have followed while handling these kind of cases, because these are something we don't hear every day.
I think that's true. So the first thing is, I did maths, physics, and chemistry for A level. Okay, my father was a chemist. Chemistry was my strongest subject alongside history. And when I had a choice of what to do at A level, it was Latin, Greek, and ancient history, or modern history, politics, and theology, or maths, physics, and chemistry. And I had in mind that I wanted to read law, and I wanted to read law at Cambridge. And I had in mind that if I did humanities, they would probably ask me to do extra exams, and they were never going to ask me to do chemistry at a higher level to get in. And lo and behold, that worked out for me, which was lovely. I also thought I'd never get a chemistry lab to blow up in later life. I think if you read history books in later life, you can read history and study history and self-teach history. But blowing things up in a chemistry lab was probably something that I wasn't going to get the chance to do in later life. My father used to regale me of stories of when he was 10 or 12 years old, and the cellar at the house where he used to live, and the scorch marks on the ceiling. But that was probably about 1948, and health and safety was a little bit different in those days. So I come at things with this really quite logical mind, and I think the chess probably helps that as well. So you look at things with this algorithmic approach. You're looking for patterns, you're looking for logic, you're looking for how evidence fits together, and you zoom in on little bits of detail, but you're also keeping an eye on the big picture. And you need to be able to draw from that mass of data those little lines that we talked about before, these thin channels of information. So, well, hold on a second. If I look at all this mess, what can I pick out of it, and how do I see it in this particular way? So when the opportunity comes to do an accident reconstruction case or a fraudulent claim with engineering evidence, engineering is real. Okay, it's a great thing. I love engineering. Engineering is real. So you can look at the maths and you can look at the physics of it and go, hold on, I can see in my mind's eye what is happening. It's a visualization. So for me, that came really quite naturally. Somebody says to me, I've got an engineer in this case, and I look at the formula and I go, is that right? Is that? Whereas a lot of my colleagues at the bar, they're terrified of numbers. They're terrified of maths. They're terrified of even basic arithmetic. And I think there's a real problem with levels of numeracy and confidence with numeracy. People will say, oh, I don't do maths. It's everywhere. Any aspect of law that you're looking at, there's going to be some sort of numbers involved, whether it's a statistical analysis of DNA, whether it's an accountancy fraud, whether it's dividing up the matrimonial assets, whether it's calculating damages, costs. There is money involved at all these different levels. And once you have money, you have numbers. So if you're not confident with numbers, then I think that there is a limit, there's a glass ceiling that you impose on the practice and the work that you do. So for me, the opportunity comes along, you get on well with the solicitor says, well, actually, I'm doing this sort of work as well as that sort of work. Would you like to have a go at fraud work? Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit different and it will challenge me. And I've always been somebody who does those interesting cases where the rules aren't, you're very close to where the rules end. And you can't pick it up from the bar school manual. You can't read the book and just go, oh, yes, the answer's this. I've always joked that I should have a stamp made with "not in the bar school manual," and you just get a set of papers in, and you read it, and just stamp the front of them, and just mark it so that anybody who ever wanders in the future looks at it and goes, "I'm not touching that. That looks scary. That's difficult." So I sort of found myself doing that sort of work, and then when you're actually looking at it, I think there are different shapes of litigation. And this is a concept I'm trying to write about in one of the books I'm working on at the moment. In the simplistic form, you can have litigation which is really linear. X happens, Y happens, Z happens. I'm driving, you're into the back of me, I get whiplash, I claim damages, the end. Then you get these parallel types of litigation where, same sort of scenario, but this time you've got a bad back already. So now you've got everything going in the same direction, but there are different strands, there are different threads that you're trying to pick out. And then you get radial litigation. You get something that happens here and everything just goes, and you look at it and you go, okay, I can see the center point, I can see the key to that. And then you get this sort of miasma where you look at the wall and it's just splattered everywhere, and you're just thinking, what on earth is that? And you then sort of look behind you and you realise that there's splatter over there and there's splatter on the ceiling, and you need to sort of move around and get a different idea. And sometimes those ideas will combine. And I don't know if you're aware, we've had this issue with our sub-postmasters in the UK, the Horizon software. And somebody said to me last week, I was trying to explain these shapes of litigation to our current pupil in Chambers. And she said, well, how does that fit in with the Horizon situation? And I said, well, it's interesting. I think what we've got in the Horizon situation is any given case, any given investigation has been seen as a linear investigation. You're a sub-postmaster, money's gone missing, guilt. And people are saying, why has nobody picked up on this? And that's because if you look at one case, you just see a straight line. If you look at all the cases, you probably have a miasma. It's here, there, and everywhere because there's just so many things going on. So you have to sort of step out of that, and you have to step far enough away to look at what caused that pattern. And then you go, hold on a second, this is actually a radial case. Everything just comes back and back and back and back. And suddenly we have this starting point where there is this commonality of the Horizon software. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. But when you start, you're not looking for that. You're looking at something simple because we're simple people. Lawyers are simple, but human beings are pretty simple people. We kid ourselves that we're really complicated, but we're not. So if you see this sort of straight route to goal, you take it. If you see a path from A to B, you don't go round the corner, you walk straight across the triangle. So for me, it's a willingness to look at the pattern and step back. Whereas I think that if you don't have the confidence in your ability to think, you follow that straight line. And when you follow the straight line, you miss other things. So you need to step back, look at the big picture, and then say, well, actually, there is a straight line here. Or here is a line I can draw, and I can follow that. And that, I think, that's a thread that comes through all sorts of work. It's not just fraud, it's not just accident reconstruction. You can have a clinical negligence claim, you can have a straightforward accident claim, criminal litigation, family litigation. You can bring it down to these simple threads as long as you're prepared to surf that sort of mass of data or that miasma moment where you're just looking at it going, what's going on here? We should embrace that. But we're always told, keep it simple. And the trick to keeping it simple is to actually look at everything we've got and have an idea of what we're looking for and then try to pin it down. So that I think is my slightly convoluted explanation of how to do fraud and everything else. It's look at the big picture, but be prepared to zoom in on those little details.
So I can relate to you on several counts. That is loving mathematics, loving physics. Although I was not very good at chemistry, I love chess. And I can relate to trying to find out patterns in cases, although I'm not that old in profession as you are, and you have seen a variety of things. I also try and have different kind of questions from all the angles possible. Like you said, you need to find that pattern. And if you keep on going in a straight line, you will miss out on so many things. And this has been an issue with not having an understanding about obviously the calculations. So the maths brain or the calculative brain that you are talking about definitely makes sense. And that is what brings the difference between your thought process and the lawyers who do not have that particular kind of understanding for, let's say, mathematics or chemistry or physics. So bringing in those aspects are something which helps you actually being the best formidable opponent who demolished all kinds of experts who are on stand. I would love to hear some insights or some of your case experience where you were dealing with expert witness and how you actually effectively challenged their testimony and brought them to ground.
I think that's about a 3-week training course, that, if I put my mind. But I think the first issue is with experts. Experts are giving you an opinion. So there's a real difference. If you've got a witness who's giving you a factual evidence, they're there, they saw it, they heard it, they did it. You weren't. So that's not a fair fight. Okay, I have advantages. You'll know from the book, I have advantages. I'm probably better educated. I'm asking the questions. It's my milieu. I'm in the courtroom. It's my job. It's not theirs. But they have a truth. Whereas an expert is offering an opinion. So if you're going to ask about opinion, if you're going to opine on things, you've got to start by looking at the basis of that opinion. And that basis is twofold. It's the factual basis, the evidential basis, which we get from elsewhere, and the logic and the way in which you then formulate that opinion from the evidence that you've got. And so as a barrister, I personally believe that you can out-forensic them. I once had an expert say to me, it was the day before he was due to give evidence for the first time. He'd listened in court during the afternoon, and he said, "What will happen tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, their witness will go first, their expert will go first, and I will try to out-forensic them, and then you will go, and my opponent will try to out-specialise you. He will try to show that he's clever and knows more about your topic than you do." And I said, and I can't see that either of those fights are going to end well for them. And so you start off with asking people how they've formed their opinion. And we use this idea that correlation and causation are not the same thing all the time. Yeah, we just state it. It's so trite. Correlation is not causation. And then we immediately fall into the same trap. We can stand there with a big sign behind us saying, correlation, not causation. And then as soon as you see something that looks like it follows, you go, oh yeah, that must be it, because we're very simple souls. We've already discussed that. So you start off by asking questions about, first of all, what do you know? Are you the right person to opine about this particular scenario? And that's quite interesting, because there are an awful lot of experts, particularly medics, but I think engineers can fall into the same trap, who, because they're specialists in their trade and nobody's really ever called them out before, aren't prepared to accept that this is the bit I know about, this is the bit I really don't know about, but there's this grey area, and accepting that there's a grey area and where your knowledge and expertise ends is really quite important. That self-awareness is something that people lack. So you start off by asking those questions. And going back to the engineering topics that we were talking about before, one of the very first cases I remember doing as a trial with an expert, there was an engineer there, and it was all about a bench. It was a wooden bench in a butcher's shop. And some small child had been climbing up it and sort of hanging off it like a mountaineer. And the whole thing had toppled down and landed on his mum's toe, and she was, dare we say, hopping mad. And she sued and said this bench wasn't safe. And the engineer, that the claimant or plaintiff, I think it's so long ago that we were still calling them plaintiffs, the plaintiff's engineer had not performed the correct tests on the bench. He had, if you look at the British standard, you have to load the bench with a weight, and then you pull it, you block it so it can't slide, and then you pull it and you see what point it tips. And you apply a force. And he had described the force in kilograms. And I'm there going, newtons, kilograms, meters per second squared, gravitational constant, all the stuff that I did at physics naturally just sort of comes flooding back to you. So my first question was, I thought that the unit of force was newtons. Well, yes. I said, well, those are kilograms, meters per second squared. And he said, yes. I said, so what happened to the meters per second squared? And he said, well, it's easier for people to understand kilograms than force. I said, well, that's fine. But kilograms exert a downwards force because of gravity, and this is a sideways force. So it's really hard to imagine what 30 bags of sugar going sideways feels like. So you're drawing these little pictures in your mind, and again, it's that visualization. Can they explain it well enough to you? We talk about how we explain concepts to clients. An expert should be able to explain it to you, but they should also have in mind that they might not know the answer. So if you can ask an expert a question that they shouldn't know the answer to, and they still want to give you an answer, they still want to opine, they still want to exert their authority over you, and say that they're cleverer, you think to yourself, well, now the judge knows that you're prepared to say anything about anything. You'll be predicting the football scores next because you've got an opinion on it, and you don't realise that your qualification doesn't extend to being an expert on football. You might be a football expert, but that's not what you're here for. So the key for me is looking at opinion and how we form it. And it's interesting, that was the first book I ended up writing. Somebody asked me if I would write them a book. And Tim at Law Brief Publishing contacted me, years and years ago now, saying, will you write a book? And I said, well, I wasn't thinking about writing a book. What do you want me to write a book about? And he asked me whether I'd write about noise-induced hearing loss or something like industrial deafness type book. I said, I'd rather pull out my own teeth, and could I not write a book about something I wanted to write about? And 90 minutes later, I sent him a contents page and said, I'd like to write this book about experts. And the conversation went, but we do niche. And I said, yes. And he said, an expert is ubiquitous. And I said, yes. And he said, so why? Because it is ubiquitous. How we stop and we think about opinion and how we formulate opinion is key to what we do in life. The law, people get interested in the law because it's a distillation of the human condition. It's the highlights reel. Previously on so-and-so's life, these exciting bits happened, and all the humdrum dull bits get edited out. You don't sit there with a client and say, what did you have for breakfast? What socks were you wearing? And if they remember what socks they were wearing, you know that they're making it up because it's not relevant. So the reason why people, to my mind, are fascinated with the law is it's all the exciting bits. It's the highlights reel of people's lives. And you're doing it vicariously. You come in to try and help these people, but you drop in and out. The difference between being a barrister and being a solicitor is huge. Solicitors are there holding hands and making sure that their client is okay, but only after the event. The barrister can drop in and out a little bit more. We can be more objective about things sometimes, but we deal with the important bits. And because of that, we enjoy what we do. Yes, the volume is constantly turned up to 11. We're always dealing with those difficult parts of people's lives, but that's what keeps us involved. That's why we do the job. We don't do the job for mundane reasons. We do the job because it still makes us get out of bed in the morning. So I think that when we come back to cross-examining witnesses, cross-examining experts, sitting there and thinking about their day-to-day thought process to get to their opinion is something that fascinates me. And I think that anybody watching this who sort of steps back and next time they think about an opinion that they're about to proffer, thinks to themselves, why do I hold this opinion? How have I got to this point? And can I show my working? Like we did at school, you get a point for the answer and you get 3 points for the working, don't you? And so I think that would be my take on it, that you look at the working rather than the answer, and hopefully you can unpick at that stage what the problems are.
So your clear understanding and clear-cut questions are the ones which would make you win the cases, and obviously demolish the experts. The way you talk about clarity, having mathematics and understanding law, I guess that was the motivation for you to educate people for next generation who are going to become legal professionals or who are in the process of becoming one. That may have been the reason for you to write that mini pupillage workbook, which you have written for generations to come. And there is one more question involving your teaching passion. You have been a visiting professor to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar National Law University here in India. What inspirations and where you draw those inspirations to create these kind of resources, to mentor students, to teach people to be a professor, and how does this continuous process of mentoring and guiding people contribute to your learning experiences, and how do you impart similar kind of thought process and similar kind of standards for the aspiring barristers or aspiring solicitors who come to you as pupils, as your mentees? What all is there that you nurture them with, and what do you get in return?
There's a lovely word, metacognition, and thinking about thinking. There's a musician called Fish, who used to be the lead singer with Marillion way back when, who had a song where he sings, "I've been thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking." And I'm not that complicated, but thinking about how we think is something that intrigues me. And it's not something that has led me to formal study. It's something that perhaps I should look at. I was having dinner with a friend of mine the other day who is studying this. Now, whether he's come to that from a completely different angle, and it was fascinating to actually talk to somebody who's an academic who's looking at some of these ideas that I've been coming up with off the top of my head for years. And I'm not sure whether he's been sort of sitting there taking little notes and going, I'm going to have a think about that, or whether he's just come at it purely from his own studies. It's always struck me that our process of teaching law has these three aspects to it. We learn about the practice of theoretical law. So we start off by learning how to research a case, how to read a case, how to analyse a case, and how to do legal research. And then we use that to study the theory of theoretical law. We do our law degree, we do our studies, and we learn how the law develops, and we study the statutes, we study the case law, and so we learn about the theory. And then we end up at this practice of practical law where you go out into the real world and do the job. So how do I actually practice in the real world? And there seems to be this big gap in all of that, which is the theory of practical law. We don't learn that. We learn how to be an advocate. We learn some basics about how to write an opinion or to draft a document, but we don't really dig down on a genuine theoretical level as to why we're doing what we're doing. And I like to understand why I'm doing it. I like to understand if I'm trying to fix the toilet cistern at home, if I'm trying to paint something, if I'm trying to even I'm wiring the plug, but I want to stop and think why I'm doing it. And I go back to first principles, I look at it and think, right, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And once you start thinking about why you're doing it, you realise that nobody ever taught you. You realise that you've been learning by osmosis. And I had a wonderful pupil master, but I learned by osmosis. I watched and I thought, I like that. I want to do that differently. And there's still things I do and I go, I know where I got that from. I got that from Craig. But once you start thinking about ideas that you've picked up by osmosis that are bubbling away on your subconscious, and you render them express thoughts, you render them conscious concepts, then you can analyze them more properly. So if you sit there and think to yourself, I just asked that question. Why did I ask that question? Normally you've asked a question and as soon as you've asked it, you regret it, don't you? The answer comes back and it's like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have asked that question. But to stop afterwards and sit down for 30 seconds, 5 minutes, however long it takes, and think to yourself, what did I get right today? And also, what did I get wrong? And why? But not just how do I avoid it? Because to understand how you're going to avoid it, you need to understand why you did it. So once we come back to this idea that once you've had that thought process, And you're looking at this poor, unsuspecting student who has no idea why they're doing anything. They're just pressing a button going, yeah, this will work. This is what I've been told. Press the button, press the button. You know full well that what you're doing and how you're doing it will cover 98% of the circumstances that you're in. But that fallback of why, most people only get to why when they've used 98% of their energy. They're running on fumes. They're desperate. They're terrified that if they miss that tiny why gap, they're going to end up in some abyss. They're going to fall off the board. So I keep saying to people, start with why. When you've got a full night's sleep, a full mug of coffee, your adrenaline, your caffeine levels, everything is good, but your positivity is there. Use the first 2% to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And then think, how am I going to do it? And then think, what am I going to do? Because then you're focusing all your energy inwards to the solution. And when you see that, you think, again, nobody told me that. Why did nobody tell me that? Surely somebody should have told me that at some point. And then you tell somebody else, you say, has anybody ever told you this? Because maybe I missed that day at school. Maybe I was skiving off watching Crown Court on the TV and looking at the barristers in wigs and gowns on the TV and thinking, oh, that's interesting, I'll do that. I did about 6 or 7 at the time. And maybe I missed that day at school. So you tell somebody and they go, oh, nobody's ever told me that. Let's try somebody else. Has anybody ever told you this? No. So then you start thinking to yourself, I've stumbled onto this great secret, which is simple, but effective. Think about why, then think about how, then think about what. And it's no loss to me. This isn't a zero-sum game. So imparting that concept to a student, to a lawyer, to a friend, to a client, whoever it happens to be, imparting that concept costs me nothing, but makes them a better thinker. And we've got, 8 billion people on the planet? And I can't believe that we've got 8 billion good thinkers out there. I think we're probably struggling to find 250 million good thinkers out there. It might be far fewer than that. And we look at the people in power and we're like, are you sure we got the right people in power? But if I end up talking to somebody one-to-one, in a lecture, in a book, here, and they go away and start thinking with just a little bit more focus, just a little bit more clarity, they become a better thinker. They become a different thinker. So maybe they teach their little brother. Maybe they teach their mum. Maybe they go and talk to grandma, who says, of course we do it like that. Did nobody ever tell you that? And they go, no, grandma, they didn't. Why didn't you tell me that? Well, I thought everybody knew that. So maybe it's, for me, this idea of mentoring, it's just something shiny. It's a simple, shiny idea that you go, oh, look, shiny. And then people go, wow, that's brilliant, David. And then you get the adoration. Let's be fair. We all want adoration in some way, shape or form. So then people go, oh, that was genius. It's really not. It's really not that difficult. All I've done is gone, how do I solve this problem? And if I can solve the problem like that, is when I stop and think about how I solve the problem and I render that coate and I share it and somebody else goes, yeah, that works for me as a method, then you can leave them to it a little bit. You don't get them asking the same question again and again because they sit back and they go, right, what's my thought process on this? My thought process is do this. So it's quite a sort of Socratic method. And yeah, I'm sort of Northern Mancunian Socrates, obviously in the 3-piece suit and not a toga, well, not toga, but a robe. I think that once you realise that a little bit of understanding imparted like that can make a difference to what that person does next and give them the independence. In many ways, you're just getting rid of people. You're getting them off your desk and saying, I can give you the tools to be independent. And isn't that wonderful that we can do that? So it's freeing up a bit of space for the next problem I've got to solve. And when we get to the mini pupillage workbook, it was a Saturday afternoon, 3rd Saturday of October. I was just sitting in the back room and I went, you know what, I might as well write down some of these lessons. It would be so much easier than having to go over them again and again and again. So on the Saturday, I came up with the idea. On the Sunday, I knocked it into shape. On the Monday, I pitched it to the publisher. And the first hard copy was on the shelves in about 8 weeks. And most of the gap was finding somebody to write a foreword for it and making sure that there weren't any typos in the first draft. And there wasn't much editing because these were lessons I taught so often that you just sit there and you go, okay, well, here's the lesson. You've read the book, you know what the book's about, you know how it works. So it was just me going, I have said this literally 100 times. I just need to remember what I said. And then you fill in some gaps and you make people think about it and you encourage them to engage. You encourage that feedback because you know at that stage that they will use that lesson. And what you want to do is bed it down so it's natural. It's like driving. The first time you get in a car and the driving instructor goes, now you do this, and then you push this, and you lift this foot, and you push that foot, and you, what? And then now you get in the car and you don't think about it, you just, off you go. It's that. And that's why I think the book works. I think it works because they're good lessons, but they're lessons that nobody else bothered to write down. They're lessons that nobody else bothered to think about. And they're lessons that you can bed in, and they just become part of who you are. And when you read it again, you go, yeah, I'm doing that now. It's lovely when somebody says, oh, I bought your book 4 years ago, and here's what it looks like now. And it looks like the dog chewed it. It's got 14 different highlighter colours. It's got Post-it notes on it. The edges are all battered because it's been carried around. How wonderful is that? That somebody's reading it and enjoying it and doing it again and again. So it's hugely satisfying to give, just to give. And for somebody to perhaps get something that they wouldn't get from somebody else. And you do it once, and then anybody can do it. Anybody can read it. And I just wish that we could get it. We had to go into cahoots with Amazon to publish it because each copy, as I understand it, is effectively printed afresh. They don't have a store of 10,000 copies of the mini pupillage workbook somewhere in a warehouse. They print them off in small batches. So once you look at trying to get a price point, Amazon want to take their cut out of it all. And I'm sure my publishers would be much happier if we could find a way of just sort of sending out 100 copies in one go and get the price down for people. But at the moment, we're stuck with selling it through Amazon because each copy costs whatever it is to print and package and send out. Certainly, I'm not getting rich from having written it, but it would be lovely to think that we enrich people by having written it. And that's the win that I'm taking from it. And fame and glory and offers to speak to people on the other side of the world, obviously.
I can never imagine that you wrote it for being rich. I can say that, like you said, it is to enrich people with the kind of knowledge you have garnered over these years and the way you have explained it in very simple terms. And it is obviously the day-to-day things and told in a way which helps people understand. Nowadays, even explaining to people by telling them again and again that this is the way you should be doing. Like you said, the example about your grandmother or anyone else is that, okay, I assume that you knew about this, the way you should behave or the way you should be carrying yourself forward. All of these effects, they come from obviously the experience, as you in the very start said, that it is the experience which talks. So while we are discussing about this, I would love to talk about the kind of testimonials which you get on your profile, which are basically highlighting that you are absolutely approachable, you are client focused, and your advice is very helpful to them, and it's absolutely astute. How have you cultivated these qualities, and how do they contribute to your success in representing clients?
I think that we're in a communication business. We are inevitably in a communication business. I always joke that you start something with something that's complicated and you make it simple. Or sometimes you start with something that's simple and make it complicated. And if you're really lucky, you start with something that's simple and you charge them for making it complicated, and then you charge them again to make it simple again. And but if we're in a communication business, we have to ensure that the person we're talking to gets it. Years ago, a friend of mine who's a solicitor was doing her higher rights advocacy exam. And she wasn't a keen advocate. She wasn't a confident advocate. And I gave her some advice, and I'm not going to use the precise words as I used, but I suggested that if she's cross-examining, it would be a bit like admonishing a small child. I didn't use the verb admonish. I used something else, okay? But she wrote this on the top of her paper, and she said it was fantastic until I realised I had to hand in the piece of paper with your advice written at the top of it. And so cross-examining is a bit like talking to a small child. There's no point in shouting and screaming at them. You talk to them carefully, quietly, you engage them. And in the same way, you make submissions as if you're talking to your grandmother. Because you talk to your grandmother quietly, sensibly. First of all, you keep your voice up because they're a little bit deaf, okay? And secondly, you know that they've got this wisdom, but they don't necessarily understand what you're going to be talking about. So if you were trying to explain any concept to your grandmother, you would use a particular form of words, you would use particular language, you would use a particular tempo, you would, all those ideas, okay? So as soon as you start thinking, I am going to talk to you as if I was talking to my grandmother, then, and you talk to your clients like that, because there's respect. There's respect there. You're not talking down, you're talking to, and they're not your equivalent. They're your equal, maybe. They're your superior in some ways. They're not you. You're not talking to yourself in the mirror, but you're talking to somebody who you want to respect, you want them to understand, you want them to get it. And they always think I've got, 3 heads and I eat babies for breakfast and, whatever they've been told about me, they're going to see a barrister and they're terrified about seeing the barrister for the first time. So I always start off by saying, look, first of all, I'm going to do this in plain English. And if at any stage I don't do it in plain English, you have to stop me and say, no, I don't get that. Because you leaving this room and going, he's got some fabulous long words, but I don't have a clue what he's telling me. That's not me doing my job. So I tell my client, you are the most important person in the room. I will still call my client Mr. So-and-so. 99% of my clients, I'll call them Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so. Even though they're calling me by my first name, sometimes they call me Mr., sometimes they call me David. My clerks and chambers, they call me Mr. B. Even on the five-a-side football pitch many years ago, but even on the five-a-side football pitch, I was still Mr. B. It's just the way we do it. So, but you talk to people the way that you would want to receive that information. And you teach them, you bring them through quite complex forest of information. You offer them that golden thread, but you're constantly giving the feedback. Do you understand this? Because most people can't remember more than 3 things, 4 maybe, but three or four things. Most people are stuck with 3 or 4 things. Once you get beyond that, something drops out the other end. you can think about this, but you can't humanly remember an infinite number of pieces of information. So if you're talking to somebody about a personal injury claim, there could be 30, 40, 50 different pieces of information. They're never going to remember 30 or 40 or 50 pieces of information. So what you do is you make sure that each piece of information you're giving them, when they have to focus on one thing, or maybe the last thing that they talked about and this thing, can you see how that fits together? Yes. You're just putting the jigsaw together. And if you see that these 2 pieces are not knitting together because you've got the wrong piece in the wrong place, you see that because you're looking at those small details. And then you just have to say, look, we fit all these pieces together, and that's what makes the big picture. But we can keep coming back and we can keep focusing on things. If you want to go through something again, that's no problem. Time is not the key issue here. Understanding is the key issue. So that's how I've always wanted to do the job. And then suddenly people go, cool, that's great, that really works. The client understood it. And you talk to the client and you gave them information about this, that, and the other. And so what comes quite naturally to me, I think other people have never had to do that. And I think one of my best friends from school, and I met him 40 years ago now, more than that, September 1982, day 1 at secondary school. He has an astonishing mind. He makes me look thick. He has a measured IQ of 180. Okay, and I'm good. Okay, I think I'm good. I know what my IQ is. I'm not boasting about it, but it's not 180. It's no okay. And he's lovely. If you met him, he's delightful. He's charming. He's measured. He's incredibly clever, slightly otherworldly sometimes, as very clever people often are. But I was never the cleverest person in the room when I was around him. And you start trying to play catch up, but you have to have that confidence not to hide your ignorance. If you hide your ignorance with long words and legalese, you don't learn. So you have to say to somebody, just stop. No, no. Just explain that to me again. So drag them down to your level. And because I was lucky enough to have that particular friend 3/4 plus 80% of my life now, I'm conscious that being able to simplify things and convey information to individuals so they understand it is my superpower. Okay, that's what I try to achieve. And once you try to achieve that, if you try to achieve simplicity, people respond positively to that. So you're not trying to cut away irrelevancies, but you're trying to distill so that you've got those core ideas delivered with humanity in whatever style you want. But clients, I think my clients tend to respond to that. But that doesn't mean that I'm the right advocate for them. I'm not always the right barrister. I have solicitors who instruct other members of chambers. My wife was a solicitor. She used to instruct other members of chambers. And occasionally she'd instruct me, but she instructed me when she thought I was the right person for that particular client. And if the client had these particular foibles, she went to that person or that person or that person. I can be flexible. I can talk to different people. And we'll come back to the idea of who we can talk to, because there's something really quite interesting in that. But I can talk to most people and I can be whoever that person needs to be. But it doesn't mean that I'm the only advocate out there, the only barrister out there. So, and I'm not vain enough to think that I'm the only barrister out there, and I haven't got enough time to be the only barrister doing any work. So it's quite important that you get the right barrister for the job, the right lawyer for the job. And sometimes you've just got the wrong lawyer. But that idea about who we can talk to, we have different classes. We have different people from different backgrounds, and we're encouraged that people from all backgrounds can become barristers, and that's fine. I'm really, again, lucky in that sense that I come from, we lived in a modest 3-bedroom, semi-detached house. My dad was an industrial chemist. My mum was a personal assistant. Me and my brother both went to the local primary school. We both passed the entrance exam and went to the grammar school. My mum worked really hard to pay the fees so that we could go to the grammar school. And then you take these opportunities and you meet people who've got different lives. And if I'm talking to somebody from the local council estate, I remember them from when I was kids. If I talk to somebody, some professor or some law lord, I represent a member of the House of Lords, and he was delightful. Just a really nice chap. We had a lovely conversation as two grown-ups would have. And both of us came to the conclusion that society's preconceptions of what the other person should be like didn't apply to us, but neither of us had come with those preconceptions. We both came at it as just two grown-ups who were having a conversation. And that was a wonderfully memorable conversation, just because if you'd said to me, age 7, you're going to have a conversation, you're going to be representing a member of the House of Lords, I'd be like, yeah, right. And people look at my CV and they go, oh, you've done all these things. Well, of course I've done all these things. I'm 52 years old. I mean, I've been doing the job for 28 years. I know, but I lie. Okay, but if you've been doing the job for 28 years and you've not accrued a body of work, what have you been doing? If you want to do something different and keep challenging yourself, then eventually those opportunities are going to come your way. And the reason that I get these testimonials is, if a case comes in, I will look at it. I might turn around and say, it's not for me. I can't do that. It's not my field of expertise. But I will at least look at it and think, that's a bit different. That's interesting. Yeah, I'll have a go at that. Or I can see an answer to that will help somebody. So I work for dozens and dozens of firms of solicitors. I think my record in 1 year, I'm going back several years now, but there was 1 year I worked for 72 different firms of solicitors in a year. So all you do is, when people turn around and say, you've been put up for the directories again. Who do you want as your referee? You just make sure that you don't talk to the 60 people you've annoyed this year, and you pick the 12 people that like you.
So voluminous that if you end up writing your experience for generations to read, I guess it will become like an epic, and it will be 5 to 10 volumes. The kind of experiences, the things that you must have learned at grammar school, that's a fascination. And all these things which you are talking about, they make so much sense. And obviously, the way you have taken up your career and the way you have behaved with everyone you have gotten in touch with, you must have brought in a lot of change in their lives because of your thought process, because of the way you have worked around them. With all this experience, you also must have seen over the years, over the decades, the kind of change that has seeped into the legal landscape. What changes do you think or do you foresee for the future? Another question I would like to add to the same is, what would be your suggestion, or rather your guidance or the final words for the learners or for the new entrants in the legal field? How can they equip themselves in adapting to these kind of changes and the challenges which this change brings to the legal profession?
I mean, the obvious answer, anybody who doesn't look at AI and technology generally is deluded. We don't know what it's going to do. We don't know what the overall effect is going to be. I think we can see already that we have opened the profession up, and that technology has contributed to the profession being more open, whether in the UK, whether in India. We've still got societal restrictions, but we've got a profession which certainly in the UK is saturated. Nobody wants to be a builder anymore. Nobody wants to be an electrician or a plumber anymore. There's the old joke about the plumber going out to fix a boiler and tells the client how much it's going to cost, and the bloke says, "You charge how much? I don't charge that much, and I'm a solicitor." And the plumber says, "Well, I didn't charge that much when I was a solicitor either." And so we've got this idea that everybody can be a lawyer, and that stems from the professions wanting to put themselves out there as somehow being worthy of society. That elite has become a dirty word. Certainly, it was a dirty word 40 years ago in the UK, and elite has certainly continued to be a dirty word. It's something that society as a whole does not like. And yet, if you were sending somebody into battle for your money, your freedom, your kids, you wouldn't want to just throw a brick out the window and hope that you hit a convenient passerby. You would want somebody that was elite. You would want preferably somebody better than the other side have got. So what we've done is we've encouraged people across the board to join the profession. We've made that easier for people, and that's fine because we have a fresher, wider ranging, more open profession. But I think that people use technology as a crutch. I think people find it easy to, the new generation, they're taught to use technology. They have fantastic case researching skills because of the technology that's available, and AI is only going to enhance that in due course. And the difficulty is to understand, as a new student, as a new junior lawyer, what are you going to bring to the mix? Because if the office cat can press the button and get the same response as you, they're cheaper. You just feed them some whiskers and some biscuits every day, and they meow a lot at you, and you don't have to pay them a salary in the same way. So you have to be better than that. You have to be bringing your own humanity to bear. And I think that the way to do that is going back to this idea of why am I doing it, understanding why you're doing it, and understanding how the clients feel. The clients are not coming to you for the good of their health. They're not coming to you for a bit of fun. They're not coming to you because everything is going well with their lives. They're coming to you because something has gone wrong with their life and they want you to try and fix it. And I don't think that computers can do that. Computers and the law itself, they're just tools. The law is a rule book. Okay, it's just like, the rules of the game, when you can bend the rules. If you overstep the mark, somebody's going to cry foul. But the law exists as a rule book that you follow. And if the law lords If the Supreme Court changed the law on something, there's no point in getting upset about it. I mean, you can look at it and get it wrong. I did that recently. That's not going to help me. I just have to work with that new paradigm. If this is what the law is, we just have to work with that. So I would say to students, you've got this technology, you've got the advent of technology, and you've got this advent of technological learning, but they are nothing more than the builder's hammer and nails. They are devices that you use to do a job. So in terms of what you're doing in the job, you think about what the client is asking you for, what is practicable, because there's no point in telling a client you can do something that's physically impossible, understanding what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and then managing expectation. And I don't think technology does that. I don't think technology puts a glass ceiling, blows this glass ceiling away and says, look, we can do anything. Look, we've got AI, we've got databases, we've got research, we can do this, 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 and this. But what we can do in theory and what we can do in practice are two very different things. So we have to be pragmatic, and we have to say, yeah, we can maybe do a bit more in practice because we have this device. We invented the wheel, huzzah. Now we can all sit in stationary traffic on the motorway rather than walk and make some progress. But we make technological advances, we use that technology, we try to make our lives a bit easier by doing it, but that doesn't absolve us of responsibility. And I think that the key difference I see, the Human Rights Act came in when I was 26, 27 years old. I grew up without the concept of human rights. I have an issue with human rights, but that's for another day, okay? Because I just have a problem with the logic of it. Yeah, I'm not paying everybody else's therapy bills on that once I start undermining something which is now as fundamental as that in our thought process. But I was brought up with a sense of duty, and I think people in many ways are happier when they understand that they've got duties than when they are banging on about their rights. Yeah, rights are important, absolutely, but duties give us a structure and rights give us freedoms. And we need both. We need to impose our personality on the structure, but not at the cost of having no structure at all. That's what the law is about. Law is about structure. Law is about making sure that whatever the law is on Monday, if you act legally on Monday, it's still legal on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. That's why society works. That's what law does. It gives a framework for society. So that's fine, but we can't just undermine that because of some concept of personal freedom. So I think one of the biggest changes from a societal point of view is that shift from a duty-bound society to a rights-asserting society. And I think that has, because law is a distillation of society and distillation of humanity, I think that has leached through in a way that we just need to be conscious of having a system that works. I'm an actually conservative, small c conservative thinker, albeit I want to think quite hard about ideas, and I'm socially relatively liberal. I just think that we look at these trends, we look at these changes, and if we have a generation of lawyers who think it's about them as opposed to about the clients and about the law and about their rights and our duty to try and help them, the profession will lose its soul. And I think that's actually quite important.
Thank you so much for such an insightful session. We are thankful that you came here, gave us such insightful answers for our lawyers to learn, for our learners to see how they can grow in this profession, even if they are the first generation lawyers.
It's been so nice to have a proper conversation and a proper opportunity just to take our time, think about things, because I think we spend all our time in sound bites. And actually, an orchestra needs all the sections. It doesn't just need a piccolo that we can hear up here. We need bass and we need all the different parts and a foundation. And it's been lovely to see you. It's been lovely to join you. I hope that we do it again soon.